Good morning, India, and welcome back to Casual Conversations with Citizens, where we explore the way in which we engage with our constitution and our laws. For years, our concepts of rights and justice have been defined and understood through the prism employed by lawyers and judges. But don't they mean much more than that? Don't we stumble around and grapple with ideas of right and wrong every day in offices, coffee shops, bus lines, even while watching a cricket match? To answer these and other questions, I'm happy to welcome an author, activist, and thinker who also sings a bit. To the uninitiated, our guest today is to Indian classical music what Prime Minister Modi is to lockdowns. We just can't imagine one without the other. The world of Carnatic music has conventionally been formal and strict with a unique syntax of ragas and melodies that are carefully constructed. To reach the pinnacle of the discipline at a young age is an almost impossible task. But to then attempt to break down the confines from within is virtually unimaginable. T.M.Krishna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. I never expected that introduction.
So how are things going, Krishna? I mean, it's been almost 2 months of a lockdown, and how's life been for you?
Well, personally, I wouldn't complain much. Luckily, the family is all together here in Chennai. But in terms of what impact it's had on the world of migrant workers with whom we've been trying to work, and of course, marginalized artists, it has been unimaginable. And whatever we're trying to do, I think is just band-aid and touching the surface. And at some point, you're like, okay, what do we do? What else can we do? And there's only so much you can do. So there is some amount of disappointment, frustration, irritation, and helplessness at some level, I think. There is also that feeling that bothers you, that you feel helpless after a point. Personally, I don't think I've complained much about staying at home. I think being privileged enough to say that it's good to spend time with your family and stuff like that. I'm not going to say that kind of crap, to be very honest, because it's just we privileged who can do that. So we live a little away from the city, so it's been kind of quieter than the city. But Chennai is now a big hotspot, so worrisome, and the numbers are climbing every day. So we don't know. I mean, we really don't know. I think the uncertainty of, I think everybody's asking the question, when is it going to end? As if there is this date on which, poof, we'll come back to normalcy. I think it's going to be very different. And I think our next normalcy is going to be gradual normalcy, which we won't even know set in. At some point of time, that will become the normal.
Yeah. So talking about privilege, you've yourself grown up, as you've said, in an upper caste, upper class milieu, right? And over a period of time, the kind of influences that you had at home and at school, etc., they've obviously played a big role in forming who you were. But I'm just curious about this, that, the investigation into your position in the Carnatic music firmament and how possibly you came into your passion, which actually had a very strong upper caste foundation, is something that you have questioned along the way. But when you were growing up, for example, I mean, your family, you've had a grand uncle, if I'm not wrong, who was a member of the Constituent Assembly, who was finance minister of the union government, etc., etc. So ideas of rights and stuff like that have obviously been fairly ingrained within your family. You've had a fairly liberal upbringing. Would I be right in saying that?
Absolutely. I mean, our home was as liberal as you can get within the upper caste environment, right? So, I mean, conversations were every day, discussions about, about history, about even anecdotes, like family anecdotes of, what happened in the Constituent Assembly or with TTK and with the discussions in the family house. And, so ideas of law, ideas of constitution, ideas of rights, ideas of democracy, independence was always there at home. And it was one thing about my home was it is very, you could debate anything. There was no question I couldn't ask my parents. There was no taboo at all. So that was I think that was a fabulous environment to grow up in, where, you could challenge anything Dinner was never a quiet time, though my father kept saying, "Don't talk while eating." We all fought.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but so it was a fabulous environment. I think I was also lucky to go to a school that enabled exactly that. So I studied in a school started by the philosopher J.
Yes.
In Chennai. And in a way, to a large extent, my home and my school were not in conflict because sometimes that also happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of them become kind of a conservative, crusty shell, and the other is liberal. And I think the student or the child finds it difficult to play with it, which is how do I express myself, or do I have to don two roles, right? And which I guess we all do at some level in our lives. So for me, that was never there. My school was as liberal. You could say the craziest things, and the very important thing was the teacher-student hierarchy was not sharp. Yeah. That's a very important point. Yeah, they were all our annas and akkas, or brothers, older brothers or sisters. Yeah. But beyond that, you had it was like they were friends. You could say anything. I remember we called a meeting of the principal because we thought that one of the teachers just didn't work, and we had actually debate about it.
Yeah.
So you could do that in school. I mean, it's amazing to think of that. To do it. Yeah. So I think this helped me in at least one, being fearless to a large extent.
Yeah.
Two, also find understanding what it means to question, because we trivialize that act.
Yes.
And what is an idea, right? So how does one question? The whole process of questioning was also inbuilt into my growing up years. So I think these two have played a very big role in the way I do. Just imagine, this is one world. The other world is Carnatic music.
Yeah.
Okay, which I grew up in, right? And which is it is a very old world in that sense, right? And my guru came from the village in Kuchipudi in Andhra Pradesh. He was Bhaagyo Sitaram Sharma. He was a very traditional man, incredible teacher who shared wonderfully. But he was from a different world in his mind and in his living. And if you go into the Carnatic world, it is a very different world. And we must remember, just because somebody speaks stylish English doesn't mean that they're very modern and liberal. We make this mistake very often. And you may find the Carnatic world the most flamboyant and modern feeling people, but within it's a very, very conservative world. But I think the fact that I grew up in this environment allowed me to go into that environment and still find a way to continuously express myself until when I knew I could push further than just expressing yourself. And I think that was a great advantage for me. Definitely.
So I'm curious about that. Our last week's guest also had a similar education. Srinivasan Jain went to Ishtivali.
Yeah, very true.
So with the same kind of philosophy. I'm curious about whether it's all good to have an education philosophy that possibly protects you beyond a point. I'll give you an example from my own life. I grew up in Bango. I did till my 10th standard at the Bishop Cotton School there. We had a fairly, it wasn't a conservative background by any stretch, but we had people from all milieu. And right through my school life, I had no clue about the castes of my classmates or their religions. It didn't really matter at all. We had never discussed it. 11th and 12th, my father's posted in Delhi, and I come here and I go to a school here. And within the first week, I'm hearing the talk of classmates of mine in the humanities section there, talking about how some other classmate belongs to an ST category and he's definitely going to make it into the civil services. I said, we're in 11th standard and you're already thinking about civil service, and what is an ST? Can you believe that? I mean, here I am today as a lawyer. About these issues that, pervade people's minds, and they keep thinking of caste, as a reference point, that maybe my education in Bangalore was too sheltered. Maybe it was a good thing. I was never conscious about these things. But coming back to a point you always make, it's a aspect of privilege, isn't it? That
absolutely.
You can actually not have to think about it when many of your classmates are obviously affected by it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I was just going to come to that. So, it's a very interesting thing. So I think it was protected in the sense of how any privileged house is protected. So either my school, I mean, KFI is a liberal school within quotes, but it is a liberal upper caste school.
Yeah.
Upper caste thinking school. I mean, in fact, my greatest criticism, I mean, one big criticism I have of Mr. Krishnamurti is the fact that he never uttered the word caste. He spoke about so many things in this world. He spoke about religious discrimination. He spoke about searching within oneself, but he never addressed his own privilege, which was caste. And I think that's deeply problematic and something that we need to discuss if you are discussing J. Krishnamurti himself, because I think there was a lack of self-reflection in that as far as he's concerned. So this is carried forward in all the schools. So even caste is like a very, very, it's like a textbook, one paragraph reference that happens, right? Yeah. So, but I think what helps is the environment of growing up where you can challenge something and you're willing to take in something new. This freedom of being able to receive and respond and reflect, I think helps you when you get out of there, right? Yeah. Now, if I was in a conservative school environment where you were also not allowed to reflect and question, then it becomes completely closeted and you're unable to go out to the real world and understand what's going on. But even if you are closeted in a privileged sense, but you're allowed to be a fighter in that sense within yourself and with what you see, then I think the possibility and the probability of you learning from what is outside when you move outside is greater. And I think that's what happened with me, that the learnings of questioning helped me when I went outside to the outside world and said, okay, what's going on here? You know? So I just want to give you one story that was, in fact, my daughter, when she was going to college, and she was trying, looking for all kinds of colleges. And of course, she went and saw the Ashokas of India, etc. Right? So I have a very dear friend who's a historian, Venkatachalapati, fabulous historian. And he called her one day and he said, okay, Arya, where do you want to go? So she said, uncle, I want to go, I loved Ashoka, etc. He listened to her fully for about 5 minutes. He said, let me tell you one thing. Don't go to the Azim, to the Premji's colleges or to the Ashokas. You'll see the same kind of people you saw in Ashoka, in KFI, sitting in those colleges. Go to a Christ, go to the colleges where you will have classmates from a diverse set of cultural and social and political backgrounds that will teach you to listen and learn so many new things. And I'm so glad she took her advice because she's such a different person. So I'm not putting any of the Ashokas down, don't get me wrong, but you know what I mean. That I think that it is important to throw yourself out there, especially when you come from that kind of protection. But I think that if the school allows you to ask questions and to be real in that sense, I think the learning is even more special in that sense and faster. And you're willing to change tracks. I think the toughest thing for a human being is even internally say that there is something wrong with what I'm doing or saying. And I need to shift. And to be able to shift is something that we need to learn.
Yeah. No, but now taking your daughter's example that you mentioned, right? That was a toss-up between places where liberal arts educations exist, which might bring to you the questioning nature that you managed to learn at the school, right? As against actually experiencing a classless milieu where you'll have all groups represented, etc., where you'll experience this firsthand. But isn't that a choice you have to make between possibly an institution that doesn't have that kind of representation, but will possibly engender thinking and questioning, versus where you will experience this, but you may not realize what you're experiencing?
No, that's where I think that the schooling is so important. I think, that's why we have to go back to what schools are like.
Yeah.
The problem is in Indian schooling. The fact that we have so much private education is the biggest problem with this country. We talk about, equality, constitutionally, but equality is a feeling, it is not written in any page. So now how do I feel equality if I don't realize and experience inequality wherever you are, right? Especially if you're privileged because you never experience it. Now, if schooling in India was public, for example, and if I grew up for 12 years with people from diverse sections of society very different cultures, very different caste backgrounds, and I have a relationship. Then by the time I get to college or something, I mean, caste is not something I read in a book or religion. It is something you experience. Now, when that is not there, and you expect people when they are suddenly 21 to be, socially and politically conscious, we are fooling ourselves. We have created, our society has been structured by us to be casteist because our schools and our classrooms are homogeneous structures, right? Now, within this limitation, my point is, if the schooling, wherever it is, can allow for introspective and challenging children, then I think even when they move up to higher education, they really don't need that liberal environment to continue that process. And I think that what happens is that, in fact, they will be in a better position to be true and to be self-reflective. The problem in continuing in the same direction all your life is, which I mean, many times, I mean, there are exceptions and exceptions kept aside, is that all this becomes only an academic discussion. All this becomes only something about papers. No, it is something about how I feel. In fact, coming from the arts, I find that one of the deepest embedded kind of discrimination is aesthetic. And that's where it all begins. How does a person look? What is beauty? What is pleasant to my ears? Is that color garish? And if you look at how this pans out in terms of social and political positions of each of those choices. And I can tell you the most liberal people in this world, most left people in this world, within their feeling inside, will be aesthetically conscious, will never realize it. And they will say it's a taste, but we have to be very careful about taste and preference. It's a trick, it's a big trick we play on ourselves when we talk about taste and preference and beauty. Because many of this is not taste, preference, and beauty. It is social discrimination in the manner it manifests itself in our sensory perceptions. That's what I think.
No, but on the education point, right? We have structures of education in most of our schools. I mean, you've been fortunate to go to a school which was somewhat different, but in most of our schooling systems and in the boards, whether central or state, we emphasize on certain areas, right? We emphasize on science, we emphasize on history, geography, maths, English, God forbid, in Hindi. But no, Hindi, because I know my friends who are from the Hindi belt who also curse having to have that.
Okay, but I think we all did, even I did. So
we all did, tuitions and stuff like that. But I remember the educationist Sir Ken Robinson, the famous TED talk by him about education systems across the world. So it's not only India which is suffering from this. Why do you think it is that we don't have music and dance and sports, things which are in many ways more democratic as subjects and have much more going for it? For example, if you get into team sports, it teaches you to treat everybody equally, forget the barriers. It depends on your talent on the sports field, right? And in dance, if you're a good dancer, you're a good dancer. It doesn't matter where you came from. If you're a great singer, then you're a great singer or a musician, whatever else it is. But we don't have that as a formal, necessary part of our curriculum. You don't have parents essentially sending kids for tuition classes for these subjects. Don't you think it's necessary at some point? I mean, I understand the larger debate about should we have exams, should we make it competitive?
Yes.
But within this parameter, don't you think there's a necessity for us to make those as equally imposed subjects within school structures as against what we've traditionally been doing?
Okay, there are two parts. I'll answer this in two parts. The first part about why it is not. I think one of the, whether arts, we've never considered, we keep touting this country as a country of cultural diversity, artistic diversity. But we've never considered culture and art as an essential to the being or the citizen. That in some sense, culture and art is only an additive. It's in some cases a privilege or just a beautification thing, right? So you don't think that the individual, I mean, we talk about public health, we talk about education. We don't talk about music as also being as essential, or cultural change or cultural transformation and communication and interaction being as important for building community, building citizenry, and building a nature, an identity which is what we believe in some way keeps us together. We do not believe that. And that's fundamentally a huge political philosophical flaw. That we think that art and culture is just one of those things that need to be there to show off once in a while. Which is why today most of the artists in this country are struggling and marginalized because of COVID. There is no system in this country, Gopal, that gives them cover.
Right.
There is no system in this country that gives the artists all this. Forget about the rich sport, which is cricket. Let's throw cricket in a dustbin for a minute. Because it's like a Bollywood monster, because you see those two and you think everything is fine. Look at the innumerable number of sports in this country. They have no money. Okay, they have no system. They have no, because we do not think this is part of the being. This is part of what we are. That if you speak about any of this, they say, okay, first give them roads and give them water. We'll think of this later. That's such a completely screwed up way of looking at it. Because if you want somebody to use the pump set or somebody to change the toilet, you need a cultural transformation. And one thing that can do that is music, song, dance, and everything, and community. So one of the biggest problems of why we don't think of it as part of our education system in that sense is because we don't think it is essential. Because we consider poverty an economic identity. Poverty is also a cultural problem. It is not just and it's a political problem, not just an economic problem. Which is why when people say, "Paisa de lo," no, it's not going to change things. You have to change it in behavior. This is one. And now to the classroom, I'm just going to complicate that. Now, there are two things. I disagree that the world of arts and sports is some way an equalizer. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm going to not necessarily accept that notion. Because first, one of the other problems is, suppose I say, okay, let's bring music into the schools. Which music will come into the schools? That's a question that I would ask immediately. It's going to be only the music that the top, crusty, privileged part of society are going to consider are decent, good enough, complicated, sophisticated, all these words which have absolutely no aesthetic meaning into the school curriculum. So it's going to be, say, Hindustani music, Carnatic music, Bharatanatyam, Kathak. So all I'm saying is we need to be a little careful with this. So I'm saying when we say we bring the arts into the classroom, I think we have to even complicate that process. So if we are creating an environment where people are going to learn diverse things, which cuts across these barriers. And, one of the things about when you discriminate against people is you actually don't understand the other person, right? That's one of the big things. So if art can provide that bridge, art can provide that possibility of feeling something in a culture that's alien. So, and I that's true. And I would like to say that the world of art is also problematic in the sense it is discriminative. The world of sports is discriminative. Privilege does play the role. So I think along with transforming the systems where culture and art need to be there also needs to be an internal transformation the way we engage with culture and art. These two have to work together. For example, the Parayatam or Kuthu in Tamil Nadu. Or Tayyam is never considered equal to Kathakali. Okay? You have an institution. Just look at the cultural institution this country built. It built cultural institutions for all privileged art forms. Just look at Kathakali, Kalakshetra, you name it. So even within building systems for art forms, we have been discriminated. So I think both have to work together in some communicative manner to bring about a transformation.
Right. So what I would argue is that we need to take the first step, which is to make kids aware of the arts, right? Of music also. Let's talk about music now. Now, there's the threshold step where you open music to them. And then there is the step of providing an equitable framework for all forms of musical art, right? And exposing them to that. I don't think we are even at step one.
No, we're not.
So you may recollect, for example, in the US, there was that social experiment by that Washington Post reporter who made the violin virtuoso Joshua Bell stand with a $3 million Stradivarius violin and perform some of the finest violin solos in a subway station.
And
more than 1,000 people. Hat, and the rest of them all put together, 5 or 6 people put pennies. It came to $32. So the question is, it may be great, and you have talked about this in the past, that within the Carnatic music framework, performers have to be open to the idea of people listening to it and saying, this doesn't work for me. I don't like it, right? Now, the idea is that's fine, but at least you listened. The problem I see is that, appreciating art forms starts with actually listening to them, to just having the basic curiosity to listen, right? Just let's hear it. It may be great. It may not be. Now, those 1,000 people who filed past Joshua Bell, if you wore a turban and performed anywhere on a pavement somewhere, right? Like Sonu Nigam did a few years ago in Bombay. How many people would actually stop? Not because you are T.M.Krishna, but because it's mellifluous, beautiful music that you're hearing, right? It shouldn't be because you're T.M.Krishna. It should be because the music is great. But for that, it's not about you making a subjective opinion that this music is great. It's about, this is music. Let me stop here and pause, right? The idea of pausing is something very critical to the arts. In a school system where you're forced to be ambitious and you're forced to get your grades and you're forced to rush around in this headless melee, pausing is not something we do, right? Which is why I was stunned, I must tell you, when Nikhil told me that you have 26,000 followers or 27,000 followers or something on Twitter, because I said, are you kidding me? I mean, this guy is like the biggest voice in music. Forget about your political opinion. Forget about all that. But I'm saying you're in many ways like one of the preeminent vocalists in any form of music in this country. And I'm not talking about Carnatic music. I'm just talking about in music. But so isn't there a threshold issue about getting kids familiar with just music per se and the other arts?
See, there are two things to it. I think in fact, the example of playing in the subway is a very, very telling example on why does a person listen, I think it's a very important point, because it again comes back to the fact that you don't listen because only something sounds good.
Yeah.
You listen for many factors, and you also don't listen for those factors, right? So it's a very important aspect of understanding why even a person many people engage with art in any way. So which is why, when you go to the classroom, now you spoke about pause, and I think pause in anything, let alone music, is an essential aspect of it, should be an essential aspect of education. And pause isn't, because our education system is driven towards fundamentally about getting some marks and making your way wherever, whichever part where you are making your way to make some good money. I mean, that's the whole notion. Our whole notion of education is built on that premise.
Yeah.
Okay, that this is a job-serving system, right? Now, when you have that, then there is no question of pause or reflection, because pause or reflection actually breaks the machinery down. And, it's like the gen set, which just you put it on, it goes permanently, right? Now, pause basically says shut the gen set off for about 15 minutes and finish. Yeah. You're killing everything. So, and there's no doubt that every art form requires pause. There's no art form in the world that does not require pause. Yeah. And pause has got, we confuse pause to be connected with the nature of the art form. If the art form is solemn, it's not that. Yeah. Pause is the ability to quieten down, as simple as that. Pause is leisure. And pause is not inaction. Pause is a very active state. Now, any of this is considered an antithesis to be able to do well in life. Now, in such an environment, even if you bring the arts into the classroom, it is only seen as, we use these words, you need the arts also to open up the mind or to make, all that is actually just fluff. It really means nothing. Because if you don't take something seriously, you will never respect it. And we've never taken the arts seriously in education. And therefore, it's never respected. And one other reason is the The idea of economics in education. How many of you can make money and survive with arts? Why will you take up arts? Art is only possible. So my point is that the first step is not taken because pause is also not seen to be something that is essential for the citizen. Because pause means you will question and reflect. Let's remember one thing, that pause is a problem for any kind of an authoritarian, any kind of an autocratic socio-political mindset. And we all have to accept that irrespective of who's in governance in this country, we have a cultural problem of feeling that an autocratic, loud-sounding, convincing voice as an important part to our cultural makeup. Okay? Right. There is a feudalness ingrained in us. Yeah. And pause challenges that feudalness, which is why arts and the cultural manifestations challenge such systems, because they allow you to reflect and ask the question.
Yeah.
And it goes into, I think, this social mindset also on why we love the rat race. Look at the culture, just look at the communities that love the rat race. Indians love it. The Chinese love it. Let's be a little, I'm not, casting aspersions, but just look at the mindset.
Yeah.
And what are the subjects that we all love? That which tallies.
Yeah.
Right? Anything that doesn't tally is doubtful, is questionable. You can challenge it, you can debate it, and finally come up saying, we don't know. And look at the cultures that don't like that.
Yeah.
There is something cultural about this.
Well, moving away to when you started writing about music, right? I do know that you had worked on a coffee table book about voices within Carnatic music. You'd co-authored that. But subsequently in 2013, I think, you came up with this fairly comprehensive work, Southern Music. And you explore in that themes with reference to what you've been talking about, how the Carnatic music firmament essentially seem to operate out of kind of clubs which are very caste oriented. Now, I wanted to ask you this very candid question. Now, the T.M.Krishna in 2013 was a man who had arrived. You were already well recognized on the firmament. You were a great voice in more ways than one, etc. Now, if you had written about this, I understand that many of these issues came to you while you were researching the book, etc. But if you had written about it, say, in 1998, right, when you were just starting,
I would have got my ass kicked.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about that fact. I mean, was it a conscious decision to hang on, even though you had some clue about the fact that what you were a part of had these kind of very strong problematic underpinnings? Was it something you had thought of, it had struck you, but you waited? Or was it something that struck you only much later?
Okay. Firstly, it was a gradual process. I don't think any of this came to me in one sitting or through the period. It was through a lot of investigation that I just did because I was just had time and I was curious about history. So I just spent time reading and bothering scholars and trying to understand both the musicological history, and that automatically led me to the social history of South India, about culture of South India, the politics, the constitution. All this comes, once you open that, I mean, there's no end to it, right?
Yeah.
I think until I wrote the book, I mean, to be honestly, the book helped me. Whether it helped other people or not, it helped me tremendously. I had all these multiple ideas, multiple, thought processes, questions, which I had picked up from all the reading and the research that I'd done. And the book actually allowed me to bring it together in something that made sense on why some things are in a certain way, and and what we need to be critical about. Now, to the power question, which is your question essentially.
Yeah.
This is a question that I have asked myself, honestly. And I don't have a good answer to that. I really don't have a good answer to that. Was I being clever and strategic? I don't think so consciously. But can I negate the possibility that I also knew my power position for a long time? And somewhere in the subconscious, I was waiting to get to a position where I could challenge the system. I can't negate that possibility that my subconscious was functioning that way. I mean, because even challenging a power structure is about your power.
Yeah.
The only reason people talk about that book today is because I wrote it.
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I can't, I can't be fraudulent and say, it just naturally all this happened. I don't think so. I think there's possibly also somewhere, what you can push when. There is at least subconscious strategy to it.
Yeah.
You know when you can say what, to what extent you can say what, and then you start pushing. Then the book comes and book just came by accident. But nevertheless, I knew probably at that point that I could say it all and not worry.
Yeah.
Right? So there is, even, that's what we have to realize, even in challenging systems, there is privilege and power, which can never go away.
Yeah.
And therefore, of course, I think that what I was and what I became by 2013 allowed me to tide over whatever resistance that came about because of that. So it is also political. It's entirely political. How can you deny that there is politics in it?
Yeah. No. So that brings me to an interesting parallel. As lawyers within the system, when we criticize, say, a judgment or the action or inaction of the courts in a particular case, you find that, a majority of your brethren prefer to keep quiet. They're happy to sit on the fence, make their money, go home. Now, if you criticize, and if you criticize often, then you're labeled as a renegade, a rabble-rouser, and then it affects your position in the profession as well. Solicitors say, nahi, uske paas mein mat jana yaar, wo ladai karta hai, jagda karta hai, that kind of stuff, right? Now, even within your firm, you've come out, you've spoken about these issues. Of course, there will be disagreements. People within the community may not agree, etc. But how many have actually, I'm talking about people who have arrived, who are at the top of the Carnatic music structure. How many of them have actually vocally come out in support? And if they haven't, are you surprised?
Well, if you're talking about the biggies in terms of none have. And maybe many of them actually don't even agree with me. That's probably why they didn't.
Right.
And also, you have to realize.
But they don't come out and disagree, do they?
Well, they have at a couple of occasions, because they're also protecting something. At one level, I understand it, Gopal. Okay, because they are protecting the system. They believe that system this is the nature of the system, and maybe at some point in time they've not even engaged with it seriously. That's possible. The other is they truly believe that, because if you spoke to me 20 years ago, and if somebody else was doing what I'm doing today, I probably would have also protected the system, right? Yeah, I would have probably done the same thing. So I kind of understand it, and I don't expect. I've never expected support. So I think what bothers me more than anything is this inability to engage. That's definitely something that seriously bothers me. It's not disagreement that bothers me. It is the fact that there seems to be complete inability to even look beyond that little cluster. All of us live in these clusters, right? Community clusters that we create. Just this inability to see beyond that world. Right. That or simply, why don't you walk out and see what somebody else outside the world sees of you?
Yes.
And to see that there can be truth in that.
Right.
Instead of thinking the person outside just doesn't know or doesn't care.
No, absolutely.
I think that bothers me more than anything. But I think the next generation coming generations are different. They are not in a power position yet to challenge the system or to ask difficult questions. But I think that at least some of them are thinking about. Let's see, if there's anything I've achieved in all these years, Carnatic music, not just Carnatic music, is that in the world of Indian culture and art, such questions are now being asked everywhere.
Absolutely.
In the decade. So in all cultures, in all clusters, now people are asking these questions about art and culture practice. So if there's anything that I feel that I have achieved, it is this fact that this is now happening everywhere and you can't run away from the question. I think that's a great step forward by itself. And then let's see, people may come up with better ideas than most of us. Yeah.
So that's something I want to ask you about. See, when you come out, you write a book, you're a recognized voice, you talk about these issues. That's the soft way of going about trying to bring about change, right? You're talking, you're thinking, you're getting people to debate, disagree, etc. The hard way is to possibly impose it, right? Through some form of regulation, etc. Let me give you an example. the American Supreme Court judge, highly respected intellectually, conservative man, Antonin Scalia, who passed away a couple of years ago. He had come to India about a decade back. And he was talking about the Indian legal system. And there was one thing that was interesting. He said, one of the biggest failures of the Indian system is that you don't have a Civil Rights Act. Now, if you think about it, the fundamental rights chapter in the Constitution, those are rights we have against the state by and large. And there are small little aspects where you can tell the state that, look, this is vis-a-vis another person. You have failed in your duty in not preventing that other person from violating my rights in a particular manner. But vis-a-vis citizens, among us,
yes,
we don't seem to have those rights. So today, if you're a Dalit looking for a job in a private company, the private company can shut its door on your
absolutely,
right? And that's why for the United States particularly, the March on Washington, Martin Luther King, the Civil Rights Act in '68 was an important step towards education, employment, housing. Those are very, very critical issues to ensure that you didn't have that kind of discrimination anymore. In India, if we did come, and I strongly believe that if you want to get rid of discrimination, there's so much that you can do the soft route. Eventually, many of us listen only to the voice of the stick. During this lockdown, if you had to enforce the lockdown on people, I'm not talking about migrant laborers and stuff like that, who genuinely had issues, but the privileged class who step out to visit a friend's house for a drink. Well, if you didn't impose some kind of law, right, and just encourage them, telling them, please don't do it, I'm not really seeing that work. So do you see that that is possibly a necessary step that we need to do? Do we see T.M.Krishna make a march on Delhi leading 1 million people to say, let's have a Civil Rights Act?
Well, I completely agree with you. I can't agree with you more. We do need a Civil Rights Act. There's no doubt about it. And I think it should cover, because I think, like you point out, there is no system in place in this country that protects and encourages civil behavior of equality. All those things that we treasure in the preamble is not there in our community, in our behavior as a society, because there is no law that enables and protects it between us as citizens. And so there's no doubt that I think that is something that I think we definitely need, because otherwise many of these practices that we see in social quarters and in social behavior will not go away, right? Will not go away. And if you have cultural transformation, which can come along with a constitutional change, then there is that we are really looking at honestly celebrating this diversity and these differences that we talk about. Otherwise, it is not going to happen. Even at a very simple level, I think that the world of arts requires reservation.
Right.
I really think that the world of art needs an affirmative action policy. Because I think, it's just the first step. I'm saying civil rights access is a huge thing that we'll have to challenge. But I'm saying even the first step, I think the world of arts, irrespective of what it is, requires some kind of affirmative action. And affirmative action, not in terms of only opportunity in learning, also looking at affirmative action that looks at space. We never discuss space. Access to space. So institutions that build cultural institutions must be told that they have to give access to artists of multiple cultures to that space. There has to be in 360 days, if you're having performances, then for 30 days this space, because we cluster people by discriminative practice, and space is such an important part in the way we keep people away. So I think that itself, that is also something that the world of culture and art can look at the immediate future itself. That doesn't need too long a wait. Just sharing for those who are not really familiar with it, Chennai has the Madras cultural season during December and January every year across multiple locations and venues where Carnatic music, Bharatanatyam, many other dance performances, etc. are held. And it's like the season. Krishna at one point had stopped. Have you continued? I've stopped singing. Yes,
stopped appearing there. But many of those locations are controlled and held by people who have a kind of obstacle that they place before people of certain groups come and participate, etc. So the question of space is very much vibrantly evident in the Carnatic music season.
But you'll see the same thing in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, anywhere.
Of course, you will find that. I mean, that the unfortunate thing is that, you know, a person with even true talent can be suppressed, stigmatized, marginalized by not having access to venues. And I think one of the other issues is very often you have a problem with access to having accompanists, musicians who refuse to perform with you because you don't belong to a certain community, or even a gender. I
think gender plays a huge role. I mean, there are many people who will not accompany women.
Yeah.
Women singers, many senior co-musicians will not share the stage with women, and that's a reality until today. So I mean, these are all real things that happen in the world of art. I mean, and there needs to be. I mean, technically, if any artist refuses to share somebody's stage because somebody is a woman, I mean, you should go to court.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you should just tell the person, I'm sorry, you can't perform anymore. But the system never does that. You know what the system does? It finds that person a male for whom that person can accompany, because the person is powerful enough.
Yeah.
Right? It's as ridiculous as that. So
amazing. So I wanted to touch upon something which I found very interesting. I think many of the viewers will find fascinating. That a few months ago, and you've done this a couple of times, the verses of Jana Gana Mana, the song written by Tagore, and the first stanza of which has become our national anthem. There are several other stanzas of it. Many people are not aware of those stanzas and what they mean. I'm anticipating, as always, that there will be those who will run out and say that this song was composed for George V. Rabindranath Tagore himself dispelled that ridiculous rumor with the harshest of terms multiple times in 1937 and 1939, etc., etc. But I have requested Krishna if he could, because it was absolutely heartrending, beautifully patriotic, and I think channels for many of us a sentiment that is important for us now. Would you mind just singing those stanzas for us, which are not part of the national anthem, so we don't have to worry about standing up?
Yeah, please, yeah. I mean, I too didn't know about these stanzas, to be very honest. And I think I had just delivered the Antamurthy Memorial Lecture in Bangalore. And a young girl came to me and asked me, can you tell me why the Northeast is not mentioned in the anthem? Okay. And at that point I said, that's a very good question on why it is not mentioned. And I didn't think it was mentioned. So I spoke to Gopal Gandhi about this. He said, you're wrong. It is there in the song. Yeah. It's just that we didn't include it in the anthem. And that is a good point. But the song, and that's when I saw all the verses of the anthem. And I was in tears just reading them. Yeah. And considering the environment that we are in today, and it moved me so much that I had to sing it. I mean, that's when I started singing it wherever I could. So I will do it now.
Please.
Ahvano procharito shumitobo udarubani Ohorahotobo ahvano procharito shumitobo udarubani Hindu, Baudha, Shikho, Jano, Paroshiko, Uchchhalo, Mano, Kristani. Hindu, Baudha, Shikho, Jano, Paroshiko, Uchchhalo, Mano, Kristani. Purব পশ্চিম আসে তো তব সিংহাসন পাশে প্রেম হরণত গান ঘোর তিমির ঘন নিবিড় নিশীতে পীড়িত মূর্ছিত দেশে তিমির ঘন নিবিড় নিশীতে পীড়িত মূর্ছিত দেশে জাগৃত ছিল তব অবিচল মঙ্গল হত নয়নে আনিমেষে দুঃস্বপ্নে আতঙ্কে রোখ করিলে অঙ্কে স্নেহময়ী রাত্রি প্রভাতিল উদিল রবি ছবি পূর্ব উদয়গিরি ভালে রাত্রি প্রভাতিল উদিল রবি ছবি পূর্ব উদয়গিরি ভালে গাহে বিহঙ্গম পুণ্য সমীর নব জীবন শোধালে গাহে বিহঙ্গম পুণ্য সমীর নব জীবন শোধালে তব করুণারুণ রাগে নিদ্রিত ভারত জাগে তব করুণারুণ রাগে নিদ্রিত ভারত জাগে তব চরণে তব চরণে তব চরণে
That was fabulous, Krishna. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it comes from so deep within you, and I've read the translation of those stanzas, and we'll include that in the description under this video later. But don't you think it should have been included with the national anthem as well?
Without an iota of doubt. I think we got stuck in fact, what we get stuck in everything, in form and structure. And I think that's what we got stuck in. That anthem should be within a minute. It should be like, all these ideas. And I think we should have thought out of the box aesthetically and politically and musically, because these stanzas encapsulate everything the Constituent Assembly argued and finally gave us as the Constitution. The essence, the spirit is there in every one of these words. And to truncate it in some kind of an capsule was a big mistake. We should have been singing a 4-minute anthem or a 5-minute anthem that keeps reminding us that we are Hindu, we are Buddhist, we are Muslim, and the whole idea, if you look at the meaning, he talks about, I think the reason probably why they didn't is because he also talks about darkness. He talks about the people of India being in a space of darkness and that you need to wake up. But the spirit of that, of darkness being a kind of maybe ignorance or not able to see, and that we need to fight, we need to express, we need our civil rights, very, like you said, is all there in these verses. And I really wish I don't think it's still too late. We should, I think, and I think it's important when they talk about Purva Udayagiri.
Yeah.
It's the Northeast. And, the very fact that we talk about as a Northeast is itself is troublesome. We don't say Manipur, and I think we need to try and include these verses in our anthem. We call ourselves a country of culture, and I think that's where we can begin.
Right. So we are coming to the close. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you and get your mind on it. I don't know if you've visited the Supreme Court, Krishna, but we have in our first two courtrooms, in the Chief Justice's court and court number 2, we have the portraits. We have 4 portraits of former judges of the Supreme Court. So in court 2, we have H.R. Khanna's portrait on the right side. Who was the famous dissenting judge in the Jabalpur radium case. Lost his chief justiceship due to the fact that somebody else was appointed above him. But on the opposite side is Justice T.L. Venkatrama Iyer, who was a musicologist as well.
Yes.
And he was a Sangeeta Kalanidhi, and because of his very detailed knowledge of Dikshitar compositions, he had actually trained D.K. Pattamal as well.
Yes.
I remember that when you came out with that coffee table book about the 7 that you and Bombay Jayashree, etc., had put out at that point of time, in the years that have followed, and particularly given the kind of understanding, the broader understanding, etc., that you've given yourself over these years, if you had to write another coffee table book now, would you retain those 7 names, or would you move on from there and try to make it a little more inclusive?
Oh, there's no doubt that the coffee table book today will be very different in content, texture, composition, everything. I probably disagree with many things I've said in that book now.
Right.
Or I'd rather disagree, I'd probably complicate many things that were said in that book. And they would have many names that I did not include. I mean, of course, you can always argue who do you leave out. That's a never-ending argument. But that kept aside, there's no doubt there are. I have the book right next to me here actually, and I've sometimes flipped across and said to some things that I've said. I think with a broader understanding of society that I have today and of people and of art itself. There would be many things that are different about the book if it was written again, if I wrote these short biographies again. And I think they'll have more textures and more layerings. I wrote this essay about M.S. Subbulakshmi for Caravan in her centenary year, which was greatly debated and argued all over the place. And if you read that and if you read the chapter on MS in this book, they're 2 worlds. And I think what you would have read in a coffee table book is closer to what I wrote about MS if we wrote the book again, for sure.
Right. T.M.Krishna, your life has been of great achievement, of great performance, and most importantly, a deep introspection and understanding of the world around you, which has helped us understand in turn how not only to question everything that surrounds you, but also to try and make a change. Your voice, let's hope that it continues in that vein, both musically and otherwise, in the years to come. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us that heartfelt rendition, which I'm sure will be replayed many, many times. Thank you so much, Krishna.
Thank you, Gopal, and thank you, Milo, for this opportunity to have this chat. It was a fabulous, very, very invigorating and fabulous chat. Thank you very much, Gopal. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a ton. Thank you.